Okay, so get this. For the first time in like 15 years, there are no self-made billionaires under 30 on the Forbes list.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's pretty wild, right?
Hmm.
It really makes you think about what's changed in the world of, wealth creation.
Yeah, it is. It's a pretty big shift from what we've seen, in the past few decades. It used to be like every other week there was a new, 20-something tech mogul making headlines.
Right. Exactly. It seems like a lifetime ago.
It does. It makes
Yeah.
you wonder, is it actually harder to become a self-made billionaire these days?
So that's what we're going to dig into today. We've got Forbes' World's Youngest Billionaires 2024
Right.
list in front of us, and it's packed with some pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there.
For sure. So let's start with the obvious question. What does this lack of young self-made billionaires really tell us about the current, economic landscape?
Well, I think one thing that jumps out is just the massive scale of generational wealth transfer that's happening right now. I mean, look at this list. It's full of heirs and heiresses inheriting gigantic fortunes.
So you're saying we're seeing like a changing of the guard, but it's less about, these new entrepreneurs coming up and more about existing wealth just flowing down family lines.
Exactly. Take Clemente Del Vecchio, for example. He's only 19, but he just inherited a huge chunk of EssilorLuxottica.
EssilorLuxottica. Isn't that the company that makes Ray-Bans and Oakley sunglasses?
Yep, that's the one. His dad, Leonardo Del Vecchio, passed away recently and left him this massive eyewear empire.
Wow, 19 years old and in charge of Ray-Bans and Oakleys? I can't even imagine.
It's a lot of pressure, for sure. And he's not the only one. There's
Yeah.
Sophie Fielmann, also 19. She inherited a stake in the German company Fielmann AG. They're like a big optometry chain.
So like eyeglasses and contact lenses and stuff?
Exactly. And then you've got the Mystery Brothers, who now control a huge part of the Tata conglomerate in India.
Tata. That name rings a bell.
They're kind of like a giant holding company with their hands in everything, steal software cars, you name it.
So we're talking about some serious wealth and power being passed down here. What kind of impact does all this have on the wider economy?
Well, it raises a lot of questions about economic mobility and opportunity, right? When you have so much wealth concentrated in the hands of a few families, it can make it really tough for new entrepreneurs to break into those industries.
Yeah, it's like they're starting the race miles behind everyone else.
Exactly. They don't have the same resources, the same connections.
Yeah.
And then you have someone like Livia Voigt from Brazil. She's actually the youngest billionaire on the list at 19.
19. Wow. What's her story?
She's a college student, but she's already a billionaire thanks to her stake in WG, which is this massive electrical equipment company.
So she basically inherited all that.
Pretty much. It's interesting, right? You've got these young heirs like Livia and Clemente stepping into these ready-made empires. And on the other side, you've got fewer and fewer self-made billionaires under 30.
So is it really harder to become a self-made billionaire today than it was, say, 15 or 20 years ago?
Well, the landscape has definitely changed. I mean, the
Right.
rise of these tech giants like Google and Amazon has made it incredibly difficult for anyone to compete on a global scale without a ton of resources right from the start.
So you're saying the very thing that created so many young billionaires, the tech boom, has actually made it harder for the next generation to follow in their footsteps.
It's a bit of a paradox. The tech industry created so much wealth and opportunity, but it also raised the bar sky high for anyone trying to start a billion-dollar company today. You need more than just a great idea in a garage now.
Yeah, it seems like the whole game has changed.
It has, but that doesn't mean the entrepreneurial spirit is dead. You
Yeah.
still have people like Ben Francis who co-founded Gymshark.
Gymshark, that's the fitness apparel company, right?
That's the one. He literally started it in his parents' garage. It's like a classic entrepreneur story, hard work innovation, saw a gap in the market and went for it.
It's inspiring to see that those stories are still out there.
They are. But they are becoming less common. And
Yeah.
even for someone like Ben Francis, I'm sure the challenges are enormous.
Right. And there's always that risk of failure, too. I mean, look at Ryan Breslow. He was the youngest self-made billionaire last year, and now he's not even on the list.
Yeah, Breslow's story is a good reminder that the business world can be incredibly unpredictable, especially in tech. What works today might not work tomorrow, and to stay on top, you have to be constantly adapting and be willing to change directions when you need to.
It's a high-stakes game, for sure. So we're seeing these two very different paths to becoming a young billionaire, right? Inheritance and entrepreneurship. And it's fascinating to see how those different journeys shape not only their wealth, but their experiences and how they see the world.
Totally. There's a lot to unpack there. But before we get into individual stories, there's something else that jumped out at me from the list. Did you notice that 60% of the youngest billionaires are from Europe?
60%. Wow. That's a pretty big number.
It is. It makes you wonder what's going on over there. Why are there so many young billionaires in Europe?
Yeah, what's so special about the European business landscape?
Well, it could be a lot of things. Maybe it's the inheritance laws, or maybe it's the fact that Europe has a long history of family-owned businesses. And those businesses have been passed down through generations, accumulating wealth along the way.
So you're saying cultural traditions and legal frameworks could be playing a role?
Absolutely. The way wealth is generated, managed, and passed down is different all over the world. And those differences can have a big impact on who becomes a billionaire and how.
That's a really interesting point. It's a reminder that becoming a billionaire isn't just about individual talent or hard work. It's also about the larger context you're operating in.
Exactly. It's this whole complex web of factors.
Yeah.
And understanding that context is key when we're looking at these trends.
Okay, so we've got these two paths to becoming a young billionaire, inheritance and entrepreneurship. We've got this concentration of wealth in Europe. There's a lot to dig into here. I'm really curious to hear about some of these individual stories and see what we can learn from them.
Me too. There are some really interesting people on this list, each one with their own unique story to tell, and those stories can teach us a lot about the world we live in.
We were just talking about these like two main paths to becoming a young billionaire,
Mhm.
right? Inheriting the family business or like building something completely new from scratch. And you mentioned Mark Mateschitz. He inherited a pretty big one, Red Bull, after his dad Dietrich passed away.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. Red Bull is so much more than just a company, right? It's like a global brand with a whole culture and image attached to it.
Exactly. It's synonymous with like extreme sports, energy drinks, that whole kind of youthful rebellion vibe.
Yeah, and I think inheriting a brand like that comes with a unique set of challenges. It's
Yeah.
not just about managing a company, it's like you're becoming the steward of a cultural phenomenon.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So how does someone like Mark Mateschitz approach that legacy? Does he try to like stick to his dad's vision or does he try to kind of carve out his own path and make his own mark?
That's the big question, right? It's a tricky balancing act.
Hmm.
On the one hand, you have this weight of history and the expectation to keep doing what made the brand successful in the first place. But then there's also that drive to innovate and evolve, especially in a fast-moving industry like beverages.
For sure. It's interesting to compare that to someone like Ben Francis, who we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
Building Gymshark from scratch in his parents' garage must have given him a totally different kind of ownership and connection to the brand.
Oh, absolutely. When you build something from the ground up, you're involved in every single detail of its creation and growth. There's a sense of freedom and control that comes with that, but also a huge amount of pressure to succeed on your own terms.
And that success isn't always guaranteed, is it?
Hmm.
I mean, we talked about Ryan Breslow, who was on the list last year but dropped off this time around. It just goes to show how volatile these young fortunes can be.
Yeah, Breslow's story is a good reminder that the business world is constantly in flux. Things change quickly. What works today might be obsolete tomorrow. And to stay on top, you need to be adaptable and ready to pivot when necessary.
So it's not just about getting to $1 billion, it's about staying there.
Exactly. It takes a certain kind of resilience and vision.
It makes you wonder what really separates the billionaires who manage to stay on that list year after year from the ones who kind of fade away. Is it just luck, or is there something more to it?
I think there's definitely an element of luck involved, especially in industries that are prone to disruption. But I also think that long-term success often comes down to things like strategic thinking, the ability to adapt, and a willingness to take calculated risks.
Makes sense. So we talked about how most of these young billionaires are from Europe. Why do you think that is? Is there something unique about the European business landscape that kind of fosters these huge fortunes?
Well, one thing is that Europe has a long tradition of family-owned businesses, and a lot of those businesses have been passed down through generations, accumulating wealth over time.
It's just like centuries of accumulated wealth.
In some cases, yeah.
Yeah.
And on top of that, some European countries have inheritance laws that make it easier to transfer wealth within families.
So it's not just about the businesses themselves, it's also about the legal and cultural context.
Exactly, it all plays a role.
Okay, so we've got these two paths to becoming a young billionaire. We've got Europe as a hotspot for young wealth, and we've got this idea that it takes more than just luck to stay on top. Now, I'm really excited to get into some of the individual stories on this list. They're all so different, and each one represents a different industry and a different approach to building wealth.
Yeah, me too. Shall we start with someone who really embodies this new wave of tech-driven wealth?
Let's do it. Tell me about Shinsaku Sagami from Japan. He's using AI to revolutionize the world of mergers and acquisitions. It sounds almost futuristic.
It kind of is. His company is called M&A Research Institute Holdings.
Yeah.
And they're basically using artificial intelligence to connect companies that are looking to buy or sell other businesses.
So like a high-tech matchmaking service for companies.
Exactly. Mergers and acquisitions, or M&A, is a really complex process. Traditionally, it involved a lot of human intermediaries and a ton of manual analysis. But Sagami's company is using AI to streamline all of that, making it more efficient and accessible.
So they're using algorithms and data to find potential matches and assess company valuations and stuff like that.
Yep. And even to predict how likely a merger is to succeed. It's a prime example of how technology is changing the way business is done, even in areas that used to be very human-driven.
It's not just about making money, though, right? It sounds like Sagami's actually trying to solve a real-world problem.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He got the idea for his company from his own grandfather, who struggled to find someone to take over his business when he retired. He saw firsthand how difficult it could be for business owners to sell their companies, and he wanted to create a solution that would make the process easier and fairer.
Wow. So a personal experience led to this whole innovation that could potentially change an entire industry.
It's pretty amazing. It really shows the power of personal motivation and how it can drive innovation.
And he's the only self-made newcomer to the list this year, right?
You got it. It really highlights how hard it is to break through in today's business world.
Okay, let's switch gears for a second and talk about someone totally different. Gustav Magnar Witzig, the fish farming billionaire from Norway. I love that he's not only super wealthy, but he's also his country's biggest taxpayer.
Yeah, Witsy's story is a good reminder that there's a ton of diversity on the Forbes list. His wealth comes from Salmar ASA, which is one of the world's largest producers of farmed salmon.
Farm salmon.
Oh.
So we're not talking tech or luxury goods here. This is like a traditional industry that's still producing billionaires in the 21st century.
Exactly. And the fact that he pays so much in taxes shows that he's committed to giving back to society.
It does. Okay, I've
that-
got to ask about David Lehman, the German billionaire who inherited his wealth when he was only 14. That's insane.
I know, right? He got a stake in DM Drogerie, which is basically the German equivalent of CVS or Walgreens.
So like
Good-
drugstores and stuff.
Yep.
It's mind-boggling to think about having that kind of money at such a young age. What do you even do with that?
Right? It's like being handed the keys to a kingdom before you've even learned how to drive.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder how something like that shapes your whole worldview and your sense of responsibility.
It's a fascinating case study for sure. It raises all these questions about how early exposure to wealth and responsibility might affect someone's development, their values, their outlook on life. It's something we'll definitely be keeping an eye on as this generation of billionaires comes of age.
You know, it's been really interesting talking about all these individual stories and journeys. But stepping back for a second, it's clear that this Forbes list is like a window into something much bigger, right? It's like a snapshot of global trends and what's driving the world economy.
Absolutely. The fact that there are so many young billionaires concentrated in certain regions and industries tells us a lot about where the money's going and why. Like we talked about how Europe is a hotbed for young billionaires, and that's partly because of the strong tradition of family-owned businesses and inherited wealth there. Right. And on the flip side, the fact that there's only one new self-made billionaire this year, Shunsaku Sagami from Japan, really highlights how tough it's gotten to break through in certain sectors. It makes you think about where the next wave of wealth creation is going to come from.
Yeah, Sagani's success with that AI-powered M&A company is a great example of how technology is opening up new paths to wealth, even as those traditional paths get narrower. It suggests that maybe the future of billion-dollar businesses isn't so much about building these massive empires from the ground up, but more about figuring out how to use technology to make existing systems better or to solve really complex problems.
So maybe the next generation of billionaires won't be the ones creating entirely new industries, but the ones who figure out how to use tech in really smart and innovative ways to solve the challenges we're already facing. That's a pretty exciting thought.
It is. There's so much potential in areas like healthcare education, sustainable agriculture, you name it. There are huge opportunities to use technology to make a real difference and create wealth at the same time.
And it's a very different image from that classic idea of the tech mogul coding in their dorm room, right? This is about using tech to solve real-world problems on a global scale.
Exactly. It's not just about building the next big thing. It's about making a positive impact.
We talked earlier about David Lehman, who inherited that massive fortune when he was only 14. It's such a unique situation. It really makes you think about what it means to have that kind of wealth and responsibility at such a young age.
It does. It raises all sorts of questions about how that kind of early exposure to wealth and the responsibility that comes with it might shape someone's worldview, their values, how they think about giving back. Will they feel a greater obligation to use their wealth for good?
It's like they've been given this incredible opportunity to make a difference. Will they take it?
It's fascinating to think about, will they follow the traditional path of philanthropy or will they do something completely different? Maybe they'll be more focused on creating systemic change rather than just giving money to charities.
It's exciting to imagine the possibilities. This generation of billionaires has the resources, the platform, and the influence to really change the world for the better. But it all comes down to the choices they make, their values, and their vision for the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. The world is watching to see what they'll do with their wealth and their power. Will they prioritize profit or purpose? Will they uphold the status quo or challenge it? The decisions they make will shape the world for generations to come.
And on that note, we come to the end of our deep dive into the world of young billionaires. We've covered a lot of ground today, from their individual stories to the global forces shaping their fortunes and the impact they could have on the future. We encourage you to check out the full Forbes list and keep exploring this fascinating world of wealth creation and what it means for all of us. It's a topic that's both intriguing and important, and who knows, maybe it'll even spark some entrepreneurial ideas of your own. Thanks for listening.